One of the things that I read about was a thing that was called postscription. During this time in history, the Roman emperor could condemn a person to death via a note. Post that note and give a reward for the fulfillment of killing that person. Just at his whim. I want so-and-so dead. Post it up. You come in with the guy's head. Here's your money. Thanks. Do you realize at this time the emperor could and did send notes to Roman senators saying, take your own life. Because if you don't, I will. No, won't go there. Roman society. Think about this. The Jews were persecuted and killed by the Romans. They destroyed the temple. Christians. By the time Paul writes this, Nero is the Roman emperor, and what is he doing to Christians? He's using them for night torches to light the path. Yeah. Sexual perversions. I did not know this until I was studying for this lesson. Apparently, Augustus was adopted by Julius Caesar, and he was in the lineage of Caesar. But the adoption papers, the legal adoption papers, are written in a sexual fashion. Why was he adopted? That was the society of that day. Drinking, drug activities, the worship of the gods and the fashion in which that took place. Might I suggest to you that when Paul said difficult times are going to come, he wasn't talking about the terribleness of an evil that would infiltrate America. Because society of that day was already every bit as evil, more evil, in my opinion, than what our country is at this time in history. The context also doesn't seem to lend itself towards interpreting that as a commentary on social ills. Rather, if we look at the context, in chapter 2, we found Paul saying, I want you to be diligent about the way you handle the truth. And then he says, I want you to handle it accurately. And then he says, there are a couple of people named Hymenaeus and Philetus, and they didn't. And what I want you to do is I want you to avoid those kind of people. You stay away from those kind of people because they don't represent somebody who loves the truth and who wants to be diligent towards handling the truth. 2 Timothy chapter 2, beginning at verse 22, we studied that section. Flee evil desires, pursue righteousness. And then he says, I want you to avoid the trap of the devil. Timothy, I want you to be insistent on doing what is right and make sure you avoid the trap of the devil. Now we get to chapter 3, and he says, difficult times will come. Contaminators will come. What are they contaminating? Society? That's not what he's been talking about. He's been talking about the corruption of Christian people. He's been talking about people who don't love the word anymore, love the truth anymore. He's been talking about people who you need to avoid if you want to stay focused on God. And now here he is talking about these difficult times, these contaminators that come. And he gives an example of Jannes and Jambres, who he says did this whole thing to Moses. And he says those kind of people, those kind of opposers, you do what? You avoid. You see, the language is very similar. Here's what you do if you want to serve God. Here's what people do when they don't want to serve God, and avoid that. Here's what people do who serve God. Here's what people do who don't. Avoid that. And now here he is in chapter 3. Here is what people are going to begin to do who said they love God, who said they wanted to follow God. They're going to begin to act this way. If you want to do good, avoid that. Stay away from that. So, context seems to indicate to me that this is far from a discussion about the ills of society, but it is about the ills of the church. It is about the ills of the kingdom. It is about the struggles that Christians face. It is about those things that will contaminate my faith, that will contaminate your faith. That's what this is about. So, if that is true, we must find a way to handle it accurately. We must find a way to avoid. One gentleman wrote this, and I wish you could see it because I won't do it justice. In the last days, there will be a lot of people sporting a brand of caramel-coated Christianity that looks and sounds good, but will be powerless. Here's the part you got to stay with me. We are living in those last days. The world has seen enough fakes. They've seen enough weak-kneed, empty-headed, two-faced, finger-pointing, big-talking, no-walking, wimpy acting, church-playing, godless living, non-giving, doubting, pouting, gossiping, spouting, 3 strikes you're outing, I got a big problem as big as a mountain, cussing on Friday night and shouting on Sunday morning Christians. The world's had enough of the fakes. That's what Paul's talking about. There's going to come a time, Timothy, when people will be so contaminated that you won't be able to tell the difference. But however corrupt society is, will look just like the church. So, how do those who belong to Christ get led into that? 3 things I want to suggest. Number 1, they get led into that contamination by a spirit of accommodation. By a spirit of accommodation. We want to accommodate. You know, today far too many Christians are becoming accommodating to evil, to sin. We just accommodate it. Don't take a stand against it. Don't be firm against it. We accommodate it. Look at our text again. Look at verses 5 and 6. Holding to a form of godliness, although they have denied its power, avoid such men as these, for among them are those who enter into households and captivate weak women weighed down with sins, led on by various impulses. You see the way it works? These contaminators will come into homes where the door is open, and they will weigh down people who are led away by the impulses of sin. That's how sin works. But you see, what happens to us is we become accommodating of it. We open the door for it. We give it the easy chair. And all of a sudden, sin has taken its roots. Secondly, we not only live with a spirit of accommodation, we live with a spirit of assimilation. We live with a spirit of assimilation. Again, back to our text, we add verse 7 this time. Always learning and never able to come to a knowledge of the truth. Always learning. Always something new. Assimilate something different. Grab something more. See what else there is. That assimilating spirit can become a contamination to us. Assimilation is defined as the change designed to cause one to become similar to something or someone else. When Christians become like the world around them, then difficult times have arrived. 1 Peter chapter 2 says this, Christians are a royal priest. We're a holy nation. God's very own possession. As a result, you can show others the goodness of God, for he called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you had no identity as a people, now you are God's people. Once you received no mercy, now you have received God's mercy. Dear friends, I warn you as temporary residents and foreigners to keep away from worldly desires that wage war against the very souls. Be careful to live properly among unbelieving neighbors. Then, even if they accuse you of doing wrong, they will see your honorable behavior and will give honor to God when he judges the world. We are a royal priesthood, holy nation. One person wrote an observation. They said that the church has become so churchy, the world has become so churchy, and the church has become so worldly that there's scarcely any difference. That's what Paul was warning Timothy about. There is a time when these contaminators will enter into a place where they had not to be, and you won't be able to tell who's God's people and who is not. Lastly, the way that this happens is that we begin to live by a spirit of association. That is the process of forming a connection with someone in hopes that such a connection will create acceptance or some special advantage. That's what Janus and Jambres are supposed to have done. They apparently are some of the sorcerers of Pharaoh who opposed Moses, maybe the very ones who cast down their staffs and imitated the snake. They are the ones who sought, because of their position, to gain something from the very power of Egypt. These gentlemen were seeking that. The warning that's contained in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, don't team up with those who are unbelievers. How can righteousness be a partner with wickedness? How can light have fellowship with darkness? See, the question is, how can we have that kind of association? And yet when that happens, those contaminators are given footholds. I had a reading for us to read together, and obviously we're not going to be able to do that, so I'm going to read this and ask you to just really seek to be intent. What I did on the reading was I took the passage that we've studied, and I took it from the NIRV, which is the New International Reader's Version. And I changed it to first person, and then altered any of the verbs I had to make them align with that change. The reason for doing this is because these contaminators are extremely real, brothers and sisters. And it will be our last days if we give way to them. So we need to be intent in our purpose of avoiding these contaminators. And if we think we avoided them one time, we need to recognize that the reason I chose Arnold is because these contaminators, I'll be back. They will come back. We will have the desire again to follow after ourselves. We will have that continual struggle. And so it's so important for us to continually challenge us, myself, yourself, with these truths, that we're not going to allow the safety of our spiritual family to be contaminated by my choices. I'm going to do what we studied last week. I'm going to take every thought and bring it captive, throw it in prison, and then bring it to the obedience of Jesus Christ. That's my goal. That's my objective. That needs to be all of our goals. Now, with that in mind, here's the reading from 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 5. Here is what Paul wants me to know. There will be terrible times in the last days. I can love myself. I can love money. I can brag and be proud. I can tear others down. I can refuse to obey my parents. I can stop being thankful. I can cease being holy. I can stop loving others. I can become one who refuses to forgive others. I can tell lies about people. I can live without any self-control. I can be wild. I can hate what is good. I can turn against my friends. I can act without thinking. I can think I'm better than everyone. I can love only what pleases me instead of loving God. I can act as if I am serving God, but what I do can show that I'm really turning my back on God's power. If I make those choices, have nothing to do with me.